Hey, everybody. So glad that you decided to come be here with me for my first ever live show. And to that point, if there are any issues or technical difficulties, please bear with me. I'm taking a risk here, which I recognize everybody is doing with using different technology. This is the first time I've ever used live streaming. So I'm just going to go for it and see how it works out. I noticed that I've been getting a ton of comments on the channel about Hyperdocs. And so I wanted to make this first live show about Hyperdocs. So we're going to talk about some different ideas for how you can build Hyperdocs. And then I'm going to go over some different issues that come up with Hyperdoc implementation. So I get a lot of questions about link management, how to post assignments to Google Classroom, how to grade Hyperdocs, things like that. So we'll be talking about that throughout this live show today. And if you have questions, go ahead and put those in the comments. At the end of the show, I'll be addressing any questions. I have an hour set aside, so however much time I have at the end, I'll answer people's questions. And if we go a little bit over, people want to hang on and keep asking questions, I can address those as well. So we're going to start here by just talking about Hyperdocs and getting an overview of what they are. Just a reminder, this is not going to be an in-depth presentation about how to build them and put them together. I do have some other tutorials about that. This is going to be more about just addressing the types of programs that we might want to put in a Hyperdoc and then answering some different questions, like I said, about implementation. So on our agenda for this show is to first talk about what Hyperdoc is, and then I'll go over some of my favorite tools for building Hyperdocs. And I'll spend the majority of the time talking about some of the different implementation issues that are coming up and then answer questions at the end. So first, a Hyperdoc is actually a term that was invented by three women, and they have a website. They also have a book. They have courses. Their names are Lisa Highfill, Kelly Hilton, and Sarah Landis. And they basically came up with this concept of putting together an interactive digital lesson. And really the idea is that the teacher is intentionally designing a learning experience for students. So I highly recommend that you check out their book. Their website is hyperdocs.co. They have tons of free Hyperdocs on their website. Their philosophy is teachers give teachers. So they just post all kinds of free stuff, and lots of other teachers post free Hyperdocs on there as well. They have them for every subject. So definitely check out their website. They have courses on their website, the book that you can purchase. So definitely check that out. Now, they use a lesson sequence when they're building Hyperdocs that follows an engage, explore, explain, apply, share, reflect, and extend sequence. I like to use the 5 E's lesson sequence, which is to engage students, to then have students go through an exploration phase. They will then explain what they've learned, an elaborate phase, and then an evaluate phase. It's really quite similar, and really what they did is adapt actually the 5 E's lesson plan. So either method is fine. Really the purpose of following a lesson sequence is that it can help inform us about the tech tools that we choose for that particular phase of a sequence. And it can also help us with figuring out how we would use that tool. So it's actually going to be a little bit less important what specific tool we use, and more important that we're using it intentionally based on the particular phase of the lesson. So I'll give some examples of that in this show. All right, so I do want to start with some pros and cons here as well of Hyperdocs, because there definitely are some pros and there are definitely some downsides. So first, it's important to remember that when they invented the idea of a Hyperdoc, they didn't necessarily intend for it to be used for fully remote teaching, right? This was a concept that was developed prior to remote teaching. And so really the concept is that you would be using it in the classroom. It could be used for fully online learning, of course, but the idea is that you have students sort of doing this independent study that you have facilitated, and you can be supporting students along the way. Now, there are some issues that come up when we build these kinds of lessons for students in a fully remote environment, and that's some of what we're going to talk about today. So pros of making a Hyperdoc. I'm a huge fan. Hyperdocs are pretty much the way that I design all of my lessons, and I love them because they're fully customizable. So you can really create a Hyperdoc to be anything you want it to be. And I really love that about Hyperdocs. And along with that, they also just have really high level app functionality. So to give an example of that, Edpuzzle is a tool that allows us to make interactive video. And in Edpuzzle, you can do things like set the settings so that a student is not able to scrub forward in a video. You can do things like add voiceovers to video. You can trim videos. So it has some nuances to the program that are really functional. Padlet's similar. It has really high level functionality. Now, the opposite of that would be if you went with more of a kind of set menu, fixed Hyperdoc type option like Nearpod, which is really just a program that kind of has this idea of a Hyperdoc, and they've created basically preset Hyperdocs. They've borrowed a lot of different ideas from different programs. They've kind of put into their program some of the best features of some of those different apps. But because it's an all-in-one program, it doesn't have the same level of functionality. So, for example, their Edpuzzle tool, their Edpuzzle function where you can build interactive video, doesn't allow you to prevent students from scrubbing forward, and they have less editing options available to you as well. And same with Padlet, their bulletin board tool is really not as complex in any way as Padlet's. They just allow you to basically put up or have students put up posts using text as opposed to all different types of multimedia. So when you're building these on your own, you really get the high level app functionality. You get all of what an app has to offer. Of course, that comes with some downsides, particularly in a fully remote environment. So one is that students are going to need to log into numerous platforms. And this becomes more of an issue the younger students get, in my opinion. So for younger students to need to link manage, to need to get into a bunch of different programs is going to be challenging for them. It's going to be challenging for us to manage. And to that point, it's also going to be harder to keep track of their work. So it's not self-contained. It's not necessarily all in one place. They might have some work on one program that we have to go check and work on another program that we have to go check. So it ends up where potentially you have 6 different programs where you're trying to go and look for different student work. And so obviously that can cause some headaches, cause some complications on both ends. And it's also a reason why it's really important, if you're going to use this tool, that you build up to greater complexity. So you start more simple. You maybe use just a couple of different apps. You start to increase the complexity by adding more programs as you go. And also important that students have foundational technology skill development. So we're proactively teaching students about hyperlinks, about how to get documents off of certain programs. So that's going to be an important element if we want to use this instructional strategy. And similar con is our need if we plan to grade assignments, which I am going to talk about a little bit more later, to go out to all these different sites and pull information. So if you're just using a program that's a set program like Nearpod, it's all in one place. That has some benefit. Okay, so we're going to go with the a la carte method here, which is building a Hyperdoc essentially on our own. And as I mentioned, I like to use the 5 E's. It doesn't matter at all, really, what lesson sequence you're using. Like I mentioned in the beginning, what's important is that you're using the phases of the lesson sequence to intentionally choose how you're going to use a program with students. So this is an overall example of what the 5E sequence would look like. You may have seen this before in another video that I have. So we're going to start in the lesson with that engage phase. So here, for example, if I had this learning target where students were going to use multimedia tools to explain how Egyptian pyramids were built, I could start them off with an activity where they might be going into Padlet to make some predictions about how the pyramids were built. Then in the explore phase, I could have them watch an interactive video, get into some virtual reality, and to learn about theories about how the pyramids were built. Then in the explain phase, students could do something like make an instructional video in Flipgrid. And in the elaborate phase, we could have students process what they've learned, apply their learning in an authentic way by doing something like making a web page in Adobe Spark Post. And then in the evaluate phase, we could have students come back and they could do something like post their web pages to Padlet and then leave each other feedback. So I'm going to go through each of the phases right now briefly, and I'm just going to mention a few tools that I like for these phases. And that doesn't mean that they are the only tools you can use. There are all kinds of different tools, of course, that we could use for these different phases. And one thing that I've done as well that you'll notice is that I've included some repetition. So for some of these programs, you'll see that I've included them in multiple phases. And that's just to emphasize the point that it is possible to build a really strategic, well-constructed Hyperdoc where we're not actually using that many programs. It's just that the way that we're using them is going to change depending on the phase of the lesson that we're in. So if we're in the engage phase, we are going to be hooking students' interest. We're going to be activating prior knowledge, connecting them to previous lessons. And some great tools for this are Padlet, Jamboard, Whiteboard Fi. These are all places where students can collectively, collaboratively share ideas. Whiteboard Fi is not quite as collaborative, but can still be used for that purpose. And then in the explore phase, when students are learning new information, skills, content, these are great places to bring in interactive content tools. So the tools that I'm going to refer to here are not specific to any subject area. They're just ways to create interactive content. So essentially what that means is that you're able to build little checks for understanding into any piece of content that you're having students learn about so that they're not just learning passively. And that has all kinds of benefits. Of course, they are monitoring their own understanding, and you are also able to monitor understanding as well. And with most of these programs, those answers will come through live as well. So you'll be able to monitor what students are doing, how they're responding in real time, which is really powerful. So Insert Learning is a Google Chrome extension that allows us to basically make any web page interactive. Edpuzzle allows us to make any video interactive, and Actively Learn allows us to make any text interactive. They have a lot of pre-made texts and articles on their website that already have interactive questions, and you can also import your own articles in. And I think most people think of Nearpod as a self-contained lesson, but you can use it in the explore phase. And actually, I like to use it for this purpose. It's actually really great for having students learn about content. They have all kinds of great content integrations, and they also have lots of different ways that students can interact with that content. So you can link out to a Nearpod lesson, even if you build your own custom Hyperdoc. And then the next one here is also just your curriculum. So you might have your own curriculum sources that you want to pull in, and that might look like PDFs potentially of your text, or you might have an online textbook. So I'm oftentimes still pulling in my own text resources or my own curricular resources here as well. And just a reminder here too that if anybody has a question, go ahead and drop that in the chat if you have it. if something comes up, and then what I'll do in the end is answer that question. So if something's coming up for you and you want me to address it, you can put it in now, and then I'll answer it at the end. Okay, so for the explain phase, this is where students are going to be processing their learning. So Google Docs is a great tool for this. We can have students build graphic organizers or fill in graphic organizers about what they've been learning. Flipgrid is also a great tool. Students can create video-based responses to prompts that you create. Padlet, a tool that you can use for the engage phase, is also a tool you can use for the explain phase, as is Whiteboard.fi and Jamboard. So again, these are tools that can be used in different phases of a lesson. And then the elaborate phase is really the place where students are going to be applying their learning in a deeper, more authentic way. So if we're thinking about skills that are higher up on Bloom's taxonomy, so students are teaching, students are creating with the knowledge that they have learned, then that's going to be what we want students to get to in the elaborate phase. So I'm a huge fan of creativity apps and basically project-based learning and using technology to facilitate project-based learning. So this is by no means a comprehensive list, just a few of my favorites. One is Adobe Spark. So with Adobe Spark, students can make graphic designs, what they call web pages and videos. And actually what you're seeing right now, this presentation, was made in Adobe Spark. So I teach students how to make these types of web page presentations as well. And Book Creator is great for making multimedia rich digital books. Storyboard that for digital comics. Soundtrap is an audio production podcasting tool. And here's Padlet again. So let's say that you kind of only had Padlet for a while. You can do all kinds of creation in Padlet. Students can make mind maps and digital timelines, digital maps. They can actually record audio directly in Padlet. So it's very powerful. You could essentially just use Padlet for lots of parts of a lesson sequence. Then for the last phase, the evaluate phase, this is where if you're doing project-based learning, so if you just had students do a big project, usually you're not going to also tack on a quiz. You might, but usually what I do is have students do some self-assessment. They might do some peer assessment. I usually always incorporate some element of social sharing where they're posting what they just created, sharing it with the rest of the class, and also an element of reflection. And of course, this could be a place where you would also have a more traditional assessment. So you might use Google Docs here. This could be if you had a rubric that students were self-assessing on or peer assessing, or you assess them on that rubric. You can also use Google Docs to have students fill in a more discursive reflection. Seesaw is a great tool for digital portfolios. So because I implement project-based learning, I have students pick, usually on a quarterly basis or monthly basis, a piece of work that they're going to put into their portfolio, and they're going to annotate or do a voiceover explaining what that work shows, how it shows learning, and why they're proud of it, why they picked it for their portfolio. So it's great for building metacognition and self-awareness and having students understand how the work that they're doing is also leading toward building or leading toward accomplishing learning targets. And Google Sites can be a great place if you have a class website for posting student work, and then students can view work and they can give each other feedback on another place like Padlet. Socrative is a quiz builder, so similar to like a Google Forms. And Flipgrid can also be a tool that you could use for assessment. So sometimes I'll have students give a summary of what they learned, an explanation. You can also use it to have them do a reflection as well. All right, and I'm seeing some good questions coming in that I will definitely address at the end. All right. Okay, so I'm going to move on now, and we're going to talk a little bit about implementation. So the first example that I'm going to show you here is a Hyperdoc, and I built this one to be about teaching students about digital citizenship. And what I want to talk about first is how you might do this in a synchronous environment. So we're all live, we're in Zoom or Google Meet, and you're essentially running a Hyperdoc. Traditionally, we would post a Hyperdoc for students to go through. And you can do that in Google Classroom. I'll show that in a moment. But if you're doing this live, you may want to actually hold back, not necessarily post it, and instead just screen share. So you're going to share your own screen. I would recommend that you have students split their screen so that they have a tab open on the other side. And what I would do is basically just drop these links into the chat. So this is going to allow me to go through this lesson at my own pace. I can control where we are. And I'm also dealing a little bit with some of the link management issue and the just self-management and getting to the right place by putting the links for these programs in myself. So if you are doing this live, there's not necessarily a reason yet to post this to Google Classroom. I would recommend that you do that later. We should be posting all of our work to our learning management systems, but you can sort of run this in a synchronous way by just putting these links into the chat. Now, if you're in a blended learning situation where you have some students at home also learning at the same time, of course, you could post the Hyperdoc to your learning management system, and you could have those students working on it independently, and you could be sort of running this synchronously. If you wanted to do things like set it up so that you're in full control of the pace, another way to do it is to run a lesson out of Nearpod or Pear Deck, but then you're going to be limited in terms of your ability to link out to other programs. So this is kind of a way to emulate that type of experience. Okay, so that's one strategy if we're using this synchronously, to just post these in the chat, sort of emulate that experience where we get to control how the slides are being moved. And just want to show you this really briefly as well. I always start with learning targets, and then I go through an essential question with students. Here we have the engage phase. So in this case, students are going to be posting a response about what they know about digital citizenship to Padlet. In the engage phase here, we're going to continue by building some collective understanding. We'll get into Whiteboard Phi to do that. Then for the explore phase, I would have students go learn about some information in an Edpuzzle video, read an article, and actively learn. In this case, obviously, because I have this graphic organizer on here, I would be eventually pushing this slide deck out to students, having students process some information, and then coming back to Jamboard and just all posting some ideas about what they learned in the video, what they learned in the text on Jamboard. And then for the elaborate phase, students would essentially be going off on their own, and they would be making an instructional video about what they had learned about digital citizenship for the rest of the class to watch. And then the evaluate phase would involve students watching a certain number of peer videos and leaving video responses for them. So that's one example. Now, commonly, we're also going to be needing to set these up to be an asynchronous learning experience. And we're going to need students to be able to access these documents offline, do this work independently. And actually, a Hyperdoc is a really great way to set up a dynamic independent study. So I do have a couple of suggestions if you're going to do that. One is that you create a tutorial through Loom, Screencastify, it doesn't matter, and that you essentially give an overview of the entire process. So you're giving students a big picture view of where they're starting, where they're going to go. You might want to walk them through the essential question, walk them through the learning targets, and walk them through essentially the whole lesson, but keep it relatively short. You just want to essentially give students the key ideas here. Now, one issue that comes up all the time when we are creating Hyperdocs and pushing them out through Google Classroom, right? So we would be setting this up so that we are making a copy here for students, right? Probably the most common question I get is, well, what happens to all the different links that are inside of this Hyperdoc, right? So if we do this, we make a copy and we assign this Hyperdoc that I just pulled out of my Google Drive. That's only going to make a copy of this document for students, right? So they would not also get any linked documents that I included inside of that Hyperdoc, right? So that obviously creates some complications and issues. So if it's a link like a Loom video or a link to Padlet, that doesn't matter because it's just taking them out to a program where you either have a direct link to get in or they already have to sign in with their Google sign in or their Microsoft sign in. So that's not a big deal. But the issue will be if you are trying to link out to another document like a supplemental graphic organizer or something like that. And so I have a couple of suggestions here. One is that you do away with the supplemental graphic organizer altogether. So rather than including a hyperlink to a graphic organizer that students are going to fill in, you just directly embed that graphic organizer right here in the Google slide presentation. This has a lot of advantages, particularly if you're teaching remotely. One is that students will be able to type directly on here and they will not have to go out to another document. They won't have to deal with the whole issue of sharing it back with you, reattaching it somewhere. And the other is that you will be predictably able to get into these documents and leave feedback. So you can get in, you can monitor student work, you can leave them comments on their work, which is something I would suggest that you're doing while students are working on this work. So that's another question I get is, what am I supposed to be doing? I've just built this interactive lesson that I've facilitated with all these links, and now do I just sit back and hang? No, you can jump right in, you can see student work, and you can be giving them feedback. So this is a great way to address that. And basically, I stopped last year linking out to other documents. So you can see here that, I have a relatively text-heavy lesson. This is for building a podcast. And I'm just having students do all the writing directly in here. Now, another way that you can accomplish this is by making a Hyperdoc out of a Google Doc. So rather than setting this up in Google Slides, if you have something that's really text heavy, you could set up your Hyperdoc here in a Google Doc so that it's just easier for students to type in. And actually, when they first came up with the idea to make a Hyperdoc, it wasn't originally done in a Google Doc, and the Google Slides element came later. So if you plan to do something like outline an essay, you have something that's really text heavy, you may want to consider doing something where you actually just set it up here in a Google Doc so that you're kind of doing away with the whole issue of needing to type in a Google slide, potentially moving the boxes around, which can also be an issue. The boxes will move here. There's no way to fix them, but it's still just a little bit more manageable if you're going to have a lot of text that you want to look at. And the same benefit exists with doing it this way as well, where you would be able to get into this document and see student work, leave feedback directly on this document. So I usually actually have a mix of both. I don't do all of my Hyperdocs in Google Slides. Slides has an advantage of being able to add different types of multimedia. You can, add the GIFs. I'm sure gonna get some comments about my pronunciation of that. So you can add different features that you can't always put like videos, embedded videos, things like that that you cannot have in a document, but still worth considering making them in Google Docs. Okay, so let's say you're like, nope, I still want to put a graphic organizer like this into my Google Slides Hyperdoc because that's just the way you want to do it. I do that as well. There are some tips about how you can improve that process. So the way that might look, let's say I have something like this, which is a essay, or it's an argumentative paragraph outline that I want students to fill out. And let's say that I have this Hyperdoc here, and I want students to go out to this outline, and they're going to need to fill that outline in, and then they're going to need to continue to go through the process of going through the lesson, right? One thing that comes up all the time is how share settings work. So if you go up here to the blue share button, and it's actually not going to be default like that. It's going to show up here as restricted, right? So when you initially open it, it's going to be private to you. It'll be restricted. And the first thing that you'll have to do is change so that anyone with the link can view it. And then when you copy that link, and you would put that in, and you would add that as a document. Now, the issue that's going to come up is that if a student tries to open this, they are immediately going to see that they need to make a copy. So I'm going to pull up here a student document. And what commonly happens is that they get to this document and they can't write on it, right? Because they just got a view only document. Now you don't want to share it with them as an editable document, because then you've just shared a single editable document with your entire class. And so everybody can get in, unless that's your intention. You don't want to do that. But this also creates a problem, right? Where we have this view only document. So one thing that's going to happen is that students are always going to go up here. They're going to request edit access. You're going to get a bomb of emails asking you for edit access. And then you got to respond back to them and say, no, you need to make a copy of that document, right? So you could teach them to go up here, go file, make a copy so that they have it. They would then have their own editable version. And the issue with this is that they're still going to need to share it back with you. So they'll still have to go up here to the blue share button, and they'll have to send it to you, because if they don't, you won't be able to view it. You'll click on it and it'll say you don't have access to it. So that's actually an issue that is difficult to get around. So another way to do this is, rather than put the link in the way that it's showing here, we're going to take this back end of the link, and I'm going to change it to say copy. Okay. So what this is going to do is force push make a copy. So now when anyone clicks on this link, I'll show this here, it will prompt them to make a copy of the document. So they will click make a copy, and then you've basically just circumvented the step of having to teach students to go up there and go to file make a copy. Now, this does not fix the issue of them still needing to go up here to the blue share button to share it back with you. So if you do this method, you will still need to essentially train students to share that document back with you. And one way that you can really emphasize that point, that they need to do that, is by creating a little text box in your presentation here, and make sure that they're posting that link back. So you want to teach students that they need to share it back with you, and then they're going to need to post the link back to your Google slide so that you have access to it, you can see it, you can still get in there, you can still give them feedback. Now, there's another way to do it that gets rid of both issues. So students will not need to make a copy and students will not need to share it with you. And that would be to link it to your learning management system. So if you were to do this, what you would need to do is go back to Google Classroom, and you would need to create an assignment from this graphic organizer, or an assignment that has this graphic organizer in it. So what I'll do here is create that graphic organizer assignment. I'm going to pull it in from my Google Drive. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the Google slide, where I'm going to make a copy of this document so that all students have a copy. And the benefit of this is that now I have gotten rid of that issue, but the downside is that you essentially just duplicated an assignment. So if you're going to do something like this, you might want to set up a topic where you basically have a separate area. So this might be, it could be a resources topic. It could be a materials topic, graphic organizers topic, something where you're putting it in a separate place in Google Classroom that is not necessarily where students are going to go for that assignment. That's an option. You could just bundle it in with the assignment, or put it still in the same place where you're putting your assignments, and just let students know that there's essentially a duplicate. So if they see two graphic organizers, it's not like they need to fill in both of them. So let's say that I do that. I create this and I have this assignment that I now want to link to Google Slides. If you do this, you're going to have to violate my golden rule. So if you watch my channel, you know that I absolutely hate assignments in the stream. So I like having my stream without all this stuff in there, right? So I like having my stream where all it is just, whoops. Sorry, this is classwork on the stream. Sorry, hide notifications. I don't like notifications on my stream. So I like it to be nice and cleaned up. All I have here is my announcement, right? Because to me, it doesn't make sense that you would have classwork in two places, and then it just is like a whole running blog post. I don't like that. The issue is that if you want that link to that direct assignment, you are going to have to allow the assignment in the stream. So you have to go here to settings, and you'll have to allow assignments to be on the stream. It can be a condensed notification. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. You're going to click save. And then what you'll be able to do is get the link. So you can copy the link here, and that's going to be a link that won't take students just to Google Classroom in general, because if you tried to, say, link to that graphic organizer here by just copying the link that was up here, like if you did this and tried to copy that link, it's not going to take students to that assignment. So you have to get it from your stream and copy it. And then if you put it in, that's going to take students directly to that assignment in Google Classroom. That will be their own copy that's already shared with you. So it's kind of weighing the pros and cons of which logistical challenge you want to go with. Do you want to deal with, or I should actually back up and say, first, if you can, I would do away with the logistical challenge by just directly embedding graphic organizers in. If you must have a separate graphic organizer like this, you either will have to edit that back end of the link to make it so that it's force copied, and then teach students to share it back with you, put the link here so you can access it, or You pick your other logistical poison. You have to create assignments that go into the stream, and you duplicate an assignment. If anybody knows of a better way to do it, I would love to hear that. I'm always looking for a way to solve this problem. So please, if you know of something better or another workaround or another hack, I would love to hear about that. Now, the last thing that I want to show is what you can be doing once you have made a copy of those Hyperdocs and students are working on those assignments. So I had mentioned, right, that if students are in here, they're typing out responses, that one thing you can do is essentially monitor student work. So you can do this in the interactive programs that I mentioned. So if you're back up here and you have students in these programs like Insert Learning, Edpuzzle, Actively Learn, I would advise that you're essentially monitoring what's coming through. You can even give them real-time feedback as they're answering those questions. But let's say that they're working on filling in a graphic organizer like this that you have on a Google Doc. What you can do here is go to Google Classroom, and you would go to View Assignment, and then you'll be able to actually click on student work here. So I can click on an individual student's presentation. And this is going to take me here to a private comment editor, right? This is like inside of Google Classroom. So this is one way that I can monitor student work. Another way is that I can also see that in my Google Drive. So sorry, I did that pretty fast. So here, if you didn't want to see it in the Google Classroom grading portal, you could open up the folder for the assignment. That will take you to your Google Drive, and that's in your home classroom folder. And then you'll have all the copies of individual Hyperdocs for students. So then you can jump in and you can check out what they're doing. So if a student did some work here, right? Like this student, wrote, I learned something awesome, then I can hop in and I can leave that student some feedback. So I can go in and comment. And another little tip here is that this, oh, never mind, it's not showing up, it's okay. So I might say, for example, here, great, but please capitalize your first letter. So this is just a way that I can get in, I can monitor student work, I can check out what they're doing and give them some real-time feedback as well. So the last, I know I said that was the last thing, but the last thing that I do also just want to talk about briefly is grading. So I get a lot of questions as well about how do you grade all this stuff, right? You have kids going over to all these programs, and am I supposed to be entering all these different programs in my grade book? That's going to mean, tons and tons of work. The purpose of these is really that they're meant to be formative assessment programs. So they're meant to be programs that help you monitor student understanding and also help students monitor their own understanding as they're going through the learning process. So I think philosophically, we might want to think about if we actually even want to be giving grades for this type of learning, because it's learning that's in process learning. It's not summative learning. It's not learning that's reflecting what a student has learned in the end. And if you build a really rigorous summative assessment, then you can also kind of do away with grading all these little, what I call build-up assignments. So if you end up doing a creative project, I would grade that. So build a rubric that grades that rigorously and make sure that it encompasses all of the lessons that led up to your final assessment. So that either your rubric or your quiz or your test. And then if students didn't do that other work, they didn't learn the information during all the build up, the lead up, they shouldn't be able to do well, right, on your summative assessment. So it is a little bit of shift in terms of thinking. And if you wanted to sort of go in a middle ground, you could give completion work so that it's also not overloading you with a grading burden. But I would encourage people to just kind of think of this stuff as formative assessment and give students ongoing feedback. Some of the feedback will be automated if you have it set up that way with multiple choice questions. But don't worry so much about trying to go in and enter 150 different grades into the grade book for every little assignment that leads up to your assessment. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation here. So we're going to shift over and I'll be answering some questions. So what I'm going to do here is just pull some questions actually in and I'll address some of those. So yeah, thanks for your question here. So this question is about Jamboard. Yeah, comments being anonymous, one student essentially destroying the board. Yes, so Padlet will allow you to track specific comments. You do still need to have students set up accounts, otherwise they will still be anonymous. But the benefit of Padlet is that they cannot go in and change anybody else's response. So a huge downside of Jamboard that I hope they figure out a way to fix is that you can basically edit anybody's work, right? So it requires a high level of maturity of digital citizenship skills, probably better for older students, certainly better for just like quick throw up activities or maybe a place where you're leaving some information that you want students to access. But I do think Jamboard has a place. However, I do use Padlet much more often, and Padlet's a more versatile tool than Jamboard. Thanks for that question. Okay, so this question is about digital notebooks, adding new pages to notebooks. Yeah, so this is a great question, and this this can be, so what this question is asking is, let's say you push an assignment like we just did out through Google Classroom, right? You just push that Hyperdoc out. What if you wanted to make that a digital interactive notebook and you wanted to be able to continually add new slides to it? There are two tools that you can use for this. One is called Slip In Slide. It's a Google Slides add-on. And the other, let me just make sure it's called, yes. So Alice Keeler coded another way of doing this, and it's called Push Slides. And her method, I believe, uses, if I remember correctly, uses Google Forms as a way to do this. So essentially what it will allow you to do is take anything, or I shouldn't say anything, it will allow you to take any slide and push a new slide out to slide decks that have already been created. All right, let's see here. All right, so let's see. Russell has a question here about Hyperdocs being functional in a Google site. Yeah, so if you're running a Google site, I would still recommend that you use Google Classroom. So I would basically do what I just showed, run the Hyperdoc out of Google Classroom, but then link to the Hyperdoc through your Google site, if that makes sense. So yeah, you can definitely use Hyperdocs in Google sites. If you don't run it through Google Classroom, the problem is going to be that you won't have any way of tracking it. It kind of will multiply that issue of not having a way to keep track of a document, of you not being able to get into the student documents. So I would definitely recommend that you run it out of Google Classroom and then just link to that assignment, basically by doing the same exact thing that I showed, where you put it in the stream, you copy the link, and then you put that link into Google Sites. All right. Yeah, there's some feedback here about not liking Jamboard. I understand. Okay. So this is a question here about about the graphic organizer. Recommend only sharing your screen. Yeah, so I'm not saying that you would only share your screen and you would never share the document with them. It's just that for certain parts of the lesson, particularly maybe the beginning before they're actually filling out any information, you can just control where students are in the presentation by not sharing it with them yet. So you could just give them the graphic organizer or give them the whole Hyperdoc later. So yeah, essentially you would share it with them when it's time to work, definitely. Yeah, I see some people liking the editing the back of a link. And yeah, you can do that. It's not just Google Docs. This Ben is saying you can do that in Google Forms as well. Absolutely. Yeah, this is a huge issue that comes up a lot. It's unfortunate. Alternates to Google extensions. So yeah, I mean, you actually have a great one right here. So one add-on is Pear Deck, but they can, you can still get into Nearpod or Padlet. So if a program like Insert Learning for making a web page interactive, instead of using that, you could just move over to Actively Learn. So it's going to depend on what you're trying to do. There are alternates. There's not always going to be a solution. Essentially, an extension is it's kind of like a phone app that adds a little tiny bit of functionality, upgrade. Some of them are obviously a little bit more powerful, but it really depends on what you're looking to do. So the answer is yes and no. There are some programs that will serve the same function, but then there are some that's going to be hard to replicate. Yeah, somebody else recommending Quiz, which is another tool that I didn't mention, but also a great tool. And they now have they're kind of moving into the interactive content realm. So before they were more like a Kahoot type tool, and now you can build essentially slides within quizzes that have interactive elements. So that's also a great tool. This one, I don't know if this is referring to the live stream. If it is, and I know people are potentially live streaming. This is software called Ecamm. Ecamm is live streaming software for Macs, but there's other types of live streaming software, and essentially it allows you to build like a screen like this, and I can pull in comments, and you can preset different screens so you have different um, views. Like this one is set for me to be obviously just talking in front of a background that I set up, whereas the others I was green screened in front of um, the web page that I was presenting. So the software is pretty advanced and pretty intuitive, and all drag and drop. So if you are live streaming, if you have a Mac, Ecamm is definitely some software that I would recommend. StreamYard is also good if you're just trying to stream from any platform, any computer. Yeah, so this is a question about about iPads. So I think the thing here is to think about Google Slides is only really a mechanism for delivering a lesson. It doesn't have to be in a Google slide. So you can facilitate it totally on your own, like I showed by putting it in the chat or sharing out individual links to students. It doesn't have to be something that you're building in Google Slides. You could even hypothetically essentially emulate the experience of sort of facilitating where students are going in different places and different tech programs just by posting those at different intervals on Google Classroom. You could send them to Padlet to start, then you could send them over to Actively Learn, have them come back to Padlet or Jamboard. And those are all apps. In fact, pretty much everything that I shared has an app version as well. So it doesn't have to be that they're going through Google Slides if that's a barrier. Okay, this is a question about locking students into doing lessons in a certain order. Jumping to whatever you post today. Yeah, so no, not if you do it in the way that I showed. So if you set up the lesson in a single contiguous Google slide where you've basically posted the entire lesson sequence, you're not going to be able to prevent students from moving forward. One thing that my partner teacher and I started doing last year was essentially putting a buffer slide in the middle where we were indicating to students that they needed to stop at a particular place, that they should even record how much time that part of the lesson took them. They could record something that they learned in that part of the lesson. I guess I would also think about, it sounds like this is a problem for you here, Aaron. I guess sometimes when because they're jumping around to different places, I guess sometimes if the problem is that they're just moving through a lesson at a faster pace. So, maybe you intended for them to do a part on Monday, but they're actually getting through Wednesday. I guess I would question whether or not that's actually a huge problem if they're doing the work well. If they're not doing the work well, if they're, kind of phoning it in, then that's a problem. But if they're doing it well and they get all their work done and it's a couple days early and you're asynchronous, maybe that's not the biggest issue. Sounds like this is a different issue with jumping around, which would be a concern. But yeah, this isn't something you're going to be able to control unless you actually break up the slides and post those in different places, which you could do as well. There's a question about whether or not I have a base template. I do. So if you go to my website, newedtechclassroom.com, I have a lot of different templates posted there. And I also have a lot of templates, pretty much everything that I show in my videos. If you go into the video description, if I showed a lesson plan, then I've also linked to that lesson plan that you can take and use, or graphic organizer. See, I'm gonna have to think about this question. Okay, would sharing a folder for Hyperdoc help students at all? All the resources would be in the folder, and then students would just need to share the folder back to the instructor. Yeah, so you could do this. I think this method still, I have to think about this a little bit more, but it's still involving students moving documents around to different places. So from my perspective, whether we're having them move it into a folder or teaching them how to share a document, it's kind of a similar thing. So you could set up another system, but whatever the system is, unless you're linking that document back through Google Classroom where you've already made the comment, then you're still going to have the issue of needing to teach them how to do that, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just something that you need to be aware of. Yeah, I need to think about this one a little bit more. But thanks for that question and suggestion, David. Okay, Regina has a question about Edmodo. Yeah, so you can definitely, I mean, if your LMS just in general doesn't allow you to make a copy of a document, you could always use the force push make a copy feature that I showed you, where you edit the back end of the link and turn it into a copy. So you could always do that, but you should be able to push out an individual copy since it links to your Google Drive. I'm not familiar enough with Edmodo to know for sure whether or not you can do that. But if you couldn't, then you could set it up so that the link you were putting into Edmodo just had that re-edited backend so that it said copy on there, and then that would give them a copy. All right, it looks like this is a last question here, and I apologize if I missed any. There's a lot of comments here that I'm trying to scroll through. Have I created escape rooms in Google Forms yet? If this is about a video about escape rooms in Google Forms, I have not. I have had this requested, so it's on my list, which is long, but it's there on the list. If anybody didn't get their question answered, you can still put it in the comments, and I will still try to, or I will still get to it at a later time. So I'm going to be doing this again next week. I would love to hear in the comments what people would like to learn about. I haven't decided yet what I'm going to do a live show about next week. So if you have any suggestions, please drop those in the comments. And I really appreciate everybody being here. All the engagement and comments was really great for this first live show. So wishing everybody the best, and just keep in mind, we're in a really difficult situation right now, whether you're in person and you're dealing with social distancing in the classroom, whether you're trying to deal with blended learning where you have kids at home and kids in the classroom, or whether you're dealing with a fully remote learning situation. It's really hard. So we're all in this boat, right, of trying to just do our best. So just keep that in mind. You're all working hard, and just the fact that people showed up on a Thursday night to learn about education technology reflects how dedicated you are as an educator. So your students are lucky to have you. All right. See everybody next week, I hope.